I was standing in my empty apartment when the phone rang. It was my only son, David. His voice was strange, cold enough to give me chills as he said, "Mom, I've sold your apartment. It's not yours anymore. I needed the money for work." Then he hung up. 67 years of being a mother, raising and sacrificing for my only child, and he took everything away with a single call. My heart shattered, but in that pain, something awoke, calm, clear, and sharp. I took a deep breath and smiled, because there was one thing my dear son didn't know. My name is Lorraine Andrews. I'm 67 years old. Until that day, I thought I knew my son. I was a literature teacher for 40 years, widowed for over a decade, living alone in a small apartment in Portland, where everything was tied to memories of Michael, my late husband. He built this bookshelf by hand, planted lavender on the balcony, and every morning placed a cup of coffee in front of me, smiling as he said, "Beautiful morning, isn't it, love?" Those memories made this apartment more than a place to live. It was the remnant of my life. When David, my only son, married Rachel, I willingly left this home for a while, moving to a smaller apartment so they could have their own space. I still remember saying, "Son, your happiness is my reward." I helped them, sending money each month to cover their new home's payments. Everything seemed fine until David started his own company with Rachel and began facing troubles. At first, it was just a few complaints, then subtle hints. One afternoon, as I poured tea, David said, his voice soft but calculated, "Mom, if we sold this apartment, I could invest in expanding the branch. The profits would benefit you too." Rachel smiled, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You don't need such a big place anymore, do you, Mom? At your age, a quiet spot is enough." I looked around the room, where Michael used to read the paper, where I taught David his first letters, and gave a faint smile. "This house isn't just big or small," I said slowly. "It's the years I have left with your father." Rachel fell silent, and David just lowered his head. I thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. Weeks later, they brought up selling the house again, this time with more reasons: investment, profits, convenience, the future. They spoke with loving tones, but their eyes held something different. I heard my son talk about the apartment like it was capital, not the place where we lived, laughed, and cried. That night, after they left, I sat alone in the quiet room, listening to the ticking clock. The wedding photo of Michael and me reflected the dim yellow light. I realized peace is sometimes just a thin layer of paint over growing cracks. And perhaps those cracks began the moment my son said, "Mom, it's time for this house to make a profit." After that evening, things between David and me seemed normal, but I felt something had changed. In my son's gaze, the familiar warmth was slowly replaced by a cold, pragmatic glint, as if I were a stranger he needed to persuade rather than the mother he loved. I tried to believe it would pass, that work stress was making him curt, but then Rachel started to change too. She sent messages asking how I was, her tone sweet but always laced with talk of money. A friend's parents helped them buy a house, and they're doing great now, Mom, she said once, half joking, half serious. I just smiled, hiding the tightness in my chest. One evening, they came for dinner. I made David's favorite beef stew from childhood. As I set the plate on the table, Rachel said lightly, "You should move closer to us, Mom. This apartment is old. If you sold it, you could buy something new, and it'd be easier for us to take care of you." David nodded. "You know, Mom, house prices are high now. Selling early would mean a big profit." I looked at them, hearing their gentle voices sharp as knives. I only said, "Eat up, kids. The stew will get tough if it cools." The room fell silent. I realized a crack had formed between me and my son, small but deep. Weeks later, David came over with a stack of papers. "Just sign these for some small paperwork, Mom. It won't affect anything," he said. I picked them up, saw dense lines of text, and replied softly, "Let me read them carefully first." David sighed, his voice colder. "Don't you trust me, Mom?" That question hurt like a slap. I just set the pen down on the table, silent. When he left, I opened my notebook and wrote, "Today, my son spoke like a stranger." From then on, I grew cautious. I locked the cabinet carefully, moved important documents elsewhere. One morning, the building manager knocked and asked, Mrs. Lorraine, are you really selling the place? Your son said there's already a buyer. I froze, then gave a stiff smile. No, I'm not selling anything. After he left, I closed the door slowly. The wedding photo on the wall reflected faint light. In Michael's gaze, my late husband, I thought I saw a warning. That evening, I called David. When he walked in, I asked directly, "Are you looking for buyers for my house?" He was silent for a few seconds, then said, "You're misunderstanding, Mom. I was just asking for future convenience." His voice was light, but his eyes avoided mine. I looked at him for a long time, then said softly, "You've changed, David." He gave an awkward laugh, turned away, and I knew I'd lost something more precious than the house. That night, I wrote under the dim yellow light. I used to teach my students that betrayal doesn't start with actions, but with a small thought, and today, I saw that thought in my son's eyes. After that conversation, I thought David would stop mentioning the house, but a few days later, he called, his voice tense. "Mom, I really need your help this time. If the company doesn't get capital, we'll lose everything." I heard his heavy breathing over the phone, and though my heart ached, I replied, "I can't sell this apartment, David. It's the only place your father and I built together." There was a long silence. Then he said quietly, but with a hardened edge, "Then you're on your own, Mom." Those words ended the call, but opened a new fear I'd never known. In the days that followed, I noticed strange signs. Every time David visited, he looked around the apartment for a long time, as if calculating the value of every item. Rachel, meanwhile, kept her gentle smile, but her hands were restless, touching photo frames, the clock, even opening cabinets, as if by accident. I realized their eyes no longer saw this house as a place of memories, but as a commodity to exploit. One afternoon, Rachel brought me some pastries, saying sweetly, "I just worry about you being alone, Mom. If you sold the apartment, we could help you move closer to us. You wouldn't be lonely anymore." I smiled and replied softly, "Loneliness doesn't come from being far away, but from being close and not being heard." Rachel's smile froze, and I saw a flash in her eyes, not quite anger, but contempt. From then on, David's attitude changed completely. He no longer came with a cheerful demeanor. Each time he entered, he went straight to the table, picking up papers, reading bills. Once, I saw him open the drawer where I kept the property deed. When I asked, he answered curtly, "Just checking the documents, in case you need to sell and don't have to search." I wanted to say something, but my throat tightened. That night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights, and realized my son had started seeing his mother as an obstacle. David's company sank deeper into debt. They took bank loans, then cycled through fake contracts. Once, Rachel came alone, her face pale, eyes red. "Mom, if you don't help, we'll lose everything." She grabbed my hand, her voice trembling, but I knew it wasn't from affection. It was fear. I pulled my hand back and said softly, "You can earn money again, but no one can repay a lost conscience." Rachel stood abruptly, giving a faint laugh. "You wouldn't understand, Mom. At your age, you've probably forgotten what it's like to start over." The door slammed behind her, and the sound of the lock felt like a final severing. A week later, I received a notice from the bank. Someone was trying to change the property owner's name in my asset records. I was stunned. I called David immediately, but no one answered. I left a message, just 4 words. "What are you doing?" No reply. That night, as I turned off the light, I heard a faint noise at the door. I looked through the curtain. A shadow lingered in the hallway. I stood, walked lightly to the door, my heart pounding. But when I opened it, there was only a flyer slipped under the gap, an ad for quick and easy property transfer services. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. The next day, I visited Martha, my old friend next door. When I told her, she sighed. "Lorraine, sometimes blood is what hurts us most." I gave a bitter smile. I thought raising a child meant teaching him to be kind, not teaching him how to be human again. Martha took my hand and said softly, "If you need me, I'll testify for you. I saw David here last week at midnight." I froze. "You're sure?" "Sure. I heard his car park outside your place. That night, I couldn't sleep. I checked all my documents. every page. Everything was still there, but I knew it was only a matter of time. My apartment, the place holding a lifetime of memories, was becoming a target for the very person I gave birth to. I sat at my desk, the yellow lamplight falling on our old wedding photo. In it, Michael smiled, and I was young, confident, believing in goodness. I whispered to the photo, "Michael, I tried to teach him love. Why do I now have to learn how to deal with my own son?" Then I opened my notebook and wrote the final line of the night. "When money becomes the only measure, family is the first thing priced." I put down the pen, closed the book, and a strange resolve stirred within me. Perhaps I still had enough strength to protect the one thing that hadn't been stolen, my dignity. That morning started like any other. A quiet morning with birds chirping outside the window, the familiar smell of coffee lingering in the kitchen. But amidst the calm, something was wrong. When I opened the cabinet to get the electricity bill envelope, I saw the drawer holding all my property documents had been rummaged through. The brown folder I always kept secure was gone. I stood frozen for a few seconds, then tore through the cabinet, searching books, old suitcases, under the bed. Nothing. I gripped the table's edge to steady myself. In my mind, David's image from the night before was vivid. My son standing at the door, eyes averted, talking about future convenience. My hands trembled. Could it be? At noon, still shaken, the phone rang. A stranger's voice, polite but firm. "Hello, I'm from Smith and Allen Notary Office. We're calling to confirm Lorraine Andrews' signature on the authorization form for the transfer of the apartment at 134 Willow Street, Portland. Would you like to confirm now?" My throat tightened. "Authorization for transfer," I replied softly, as if in a dream. "What? What form?" "The authorization to sell the house, with your signature, Mrs. Lorraine. We just need final confirmation to complete the process." I dropped the phone, my heart pounding. A second later, I called back. "Hold that form. Don't process anything." I didn't sign anything. The employee sounded surprised, saying he'd report to the higher-ups. My legs gave out. I sank into a chair, staring at the window, the light outside blurring, as if someone had stolen the breath from this house. I called David. The phone rang, then stopped. I called again, twice, 3 times, still no answer. On the 4th try, he picked up. I tried to keep my voice calm. "David, where are you?" "At the office." "What's wrong, Mom?" "The property documents. Did you take them?" There was a brief silence, only the sound of typing on the other end. Then my son answered, his voice so calm, it chilled me. "Yes, I've handled the authorization form. Don't worry, Mom. I'm taking care of you." What did you do?" I asked, my voice barely there. And when I asked my son what he'd done with this house, he replied calmly, "It's not yours anymore." Those words, short as a knife's cut. I heard blood pounding in my ears, and everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was in the hospital, an IV in my arm. A young nurse smiled gently. "You fainted in the building hallway. Your neighbor brought you here. Your blood pressure was high, but you're okay now." I didn't answer, just stared at the stark white ceiling, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor. Everything in me felt hollow, as if my name, my life had been erased from some list. The next day, the doctor discharged me. I returned home in the cold, gray afternoon. The apartment felt eerily empty. Some items were gone. The wall clock, the wedding photo frame, even Michael's old guitar. I walked through the house, touching what remained, the worn wooden chair, the faded floral curtain, then stopped at the window where we used to sit and read together. No more laughter, no more warmth. I felt like a stranger in someone else's home. That evening, Martha, my neighbor, came by. She brought a fruit basket, her voice soft. "I heard they took David in for questioning this morning," she said. "Something about property documents." I gave a faint smile. "Thanks, Martha, but I don't want to hear more. I've lost too much to care about rumors." She placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing lightly. "Lorraine, don't give up. I know you're stronger than anyone I've ever met." I nodded, but when she left, I sank into the chair. Strong. Maybe that's just what others call loneliness. I sat for a long time, staring at the empty room. On the table was the notary's notice, proof of my own son's betrayal. I picked up a pen and wrote in my notebook, "Today I lost everything, not because of old age, but because of trust." After writing, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Michael's voice echoed in my mind. "Stay calm, Laurie. Smart people don't seek revenge with anger." I gave a faint smile. Maybe he was right. I no longer had the strength for anger, but I still had enough to face the truth. That afternoon, I gathered the remaining documents, stuffing them into an envelope. On the table, my old phone buzzed. A strange number. A woman's voice came through. "Sorry, I'm Karen Hayes, a lawyer. A mutual acquaintance referred me. Do you need help with a property issue?" I was briefly surprised. Martha had called her for me. I made an appointment for the next morning. As night fell, I didn't turn on the light. The city outside still glowed brightly, cars streaming steadily, as if nothing had happened. I sat in the dark, listening to the wind slip through the window, and for the first time, I felt the pain in my heart was no longer that of a mother, but of a woman scorned. No one has the right to take what I built over half a lifetime. No son has the right to turn memories into a bargaining chip. I opened my notebook again and wrote, "If they think I'm weak, they forget I taught students how to use words to fight for the truth." The next morning, I went to Karen's office. The woman was about 50, with streaks of gray hair and a calm voice. She read through the papers I brought, her eyes narrowing. "These documents are clearly forged. Your son used a fake authorization to transfer the property. There's still a way to take it back, but we need evidence." I nodded. "I can find evidence. Just show me the way." Karen leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. "I know someone who can help. Thomas Reed, a private investigator, former cop. He's good, but blunt. If he believes you're innocent, he'll see the case through to the end." I looked at her, my voice firm. "I don't need pity. I just need the truth." That afternoon, I returned to the apartment. Sunlight slanted through the window, casting faded yellow streaks on the wall. I walked through the house, touching the walls, the peeling paint, the cracks. They were like me, worn, but still standing. I took the wedding photo frame and placed it neatly on the table beside my notebook. Michael and I were there again, in that old photo, in a past that couldn't be sold or forged. I looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "Honey, I won't stay silent. If our son has learned to take, I'll teach him what it means to give back." As dusk fell, I sat by the window, watching the sky turn a heavy red, like dying embers. The city buzzed in the distance, but in this apartment, there was only the ticking of the clock, each beat a quiet pulse of resolve. I closed my eyes and told myself, tomorrow, I'll start again, not for revenge, but to reclaim justice for myself. The next morning, I went to meet the man Karen mentioned. His office was in an old building near downtown Portland, on the third floor, behind a frosted glass door with faded lettering, "Thomas Reed, private investigator." When I knocked, a deep voice said, "Come in." The man stood up from his desk, around 60 tall with graying hair and sharp but kind eyes. He extended his hand. "Karen told me, you need to find justice," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't need justice, Mr. Reed. I need the truth." Thomas invited me to sit, poured black coffee, and listened. I told him everything, from when David started pressuring me, to when I discovered the missing documents, and heard him say, "It's not yours anymore." As I spoke, he didn't interrupt, just jotted notes quickly, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he looked at me and asked bluntly, "Do you have any proof of the forgery?" I handed him a photocopy of the authorization form from the notary, pointing to the signature. "This isn't mine. I taught literature for 40 years. I know every stroke of my handwriting." Thomas examined it closely, then nodded. "This is fake, but to overturn it, we need to prove intent." He paused, then added slowly, "Are you ready to hear some hard things?" I nodded. "Good. From now on, you have to treat your son like a stranger. If you go soft, we lose." I stayed silent, but inside, it felt like someone had carved another scar into my heart. 3 days later, Thomas contacted me again. He said he'd traced the transaction. "Your son is negotiating to sell the apartment to a man named Mark Johnson, his old business partner." I asked softly, "Mark Johnson?" Thomas nodded. "Yes. This guy was once cheated by David in a furniture contract. lost a big sum. Oddly, now, he wants to buy this apartment. He might be seeking revenge, or they're laundering money together. My heart raced as I listened. Thomas continued. They're set to sign the contract in 2 weeks. If you want to fight back, this is your chance. I asked quietly. Fight back how? He looked at me, his gaze stern. Pretend you agree to sell. We'll set a trap at the signing. I was silent for a long time. The thought of confronting my son head-on made my hands go cold. But when I recalled his words, "It's not yours anymore," the fear turned into a steel-cold resolve running down my spine. I said, "All right, let's do it." Thomas nodded and called Karen immediately. That afternoon, I went to Hayes's law office. Karen listened to Thomas outline the plan, tapping her pen on the desk. "It's risky, but doable. We'll prepare all the documents and notify the police if we detect fraud." Then she turned to me and asked, "Are you sure, Lorraine? Once we start, there's no turning back." I replied, my voice calm. "I've lived my whole life with kindness, but they saw it as weakness. It's time I showed them. Kindness has teeth." The plan began. Thomas tracked David, documenting his meetings with Mark. He placed a tracker on my son's car and recorded some of their conversations. In one, David said, "My mom will sign. She won't dare fight back. Once it's done, you'll get your cut, and we're even." I listened to the recording in Karen's office, my hands gripping the hot teacup until it burned, not out of anger, but pain. A mother never imagines her child could see her as a pawn. One afternoon, Thomas came to my place with a small device in a box, a disguised recorder. "Just turn it on when you meet David. It'll capture everything." I took it, my hands heavy. He looked at me, his voice low. "Don't let emotions take over. We need the rational woman I see in front of me." I nodded, hiding a sigh. 2 days later, I called David. My voice was soft, almost trembling. "Son, I've thought it over. Maybe you're right. I'm old. What do I need this house for? If selling helps you through your troubles, go ahead." On the other end, David was silent for a few seconds, then let out a light laugh. "You mean it, Mom?" "Yes, but I want to meet the buyer, just to feel at ease." He agreed immediately. I hung up, sat still, and heard my heart pounding in my chest. For the first time, I felt I was about to enter a battle, not with tears, but with reason. That evening, Karen confirmed the signing appointment. This Friday, 10 a.m., at Mark Johnson's brokerage office. I glanced at the clock. 3 days, 3 days to prepare. I opened my notebook and wrote the first line of the plan. Day 1, play the weak mother. I spent the night practicing how to talk. In front of the mirror, I rehearsed a tired smile, a resigned look. I would let my son believe his mother had given up, that I accepted my fate. But inside, I knew this was when I truly began to fight. As the night grew late, I stepped onto the balcony, looking down at the quiet street. A light rain fell, and in the dim streetlight, I imagined Michael standing at the corner, holding a coffee cup, giving his old smile. I whispered, "Honey, this time I won't let anyone rewrite my life." Then I went back inside and closed the door. 3 days from now, I'd face the son who was once my pride, and I'd make him see that the mother he thought was weak still had the strength to teach him one final lesson. 3 days after meeting Thomas, I barely slept. I read Karen's plan over and over, the time, place, attendees, and legal clauses. If everything went as planned, I knew one misstep could unravel it all, and I, the mother seeking justice, would become the pitiful one in my son's eyes. But I couldn't stop. On Thursday afternoon, Thomas came with a folder and the disguised recording pen. "Just talk naturally," he instructed. "Don't ask. Don't argue. People like your son, when they think they're winning, will spill everything." Karen stood nearby, her voice soft. "Lorraine, you can stop now, and I'll handle it legally." I shook my head. "No, I need to see it. I need to see him admit it." That night, I sat at the table and wrote in my diary, "Tomorrow, I'll face the son who was once my pride. If I fail, at least I tried to live by what's right." I closed it, put it in the drawer. In the mirror, the woman staring back had a strangely calm look, no longer afraid, only resolute. The next morning, I wore the gray dress Michael loved and pinned on the silver brooch he'd given me years ago. As I left the house, I felt as if I carried his presence, silent but steadfast. Karen was waiting in the brokerage building's lobby. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded slightly. "I've been ready since the day he said this house wasn't mine anymore." The meeting room was on the second floor, bright but cold. David and Rachel were already there. My son was dressed sharply, a faint smile on his lips, his eyes gleaming with confidence that he'd won. "Mom," he said, "I'm so glad you came around. I only want what's best for you." I sat down, giving a faint smile. "Best for me? Or for you?" He avoided my gaze, pretending to read the papers. Mark Johnson, the buyer, shook my hand, saying politely, "Just routine. Don't worry." I nodded, my hand brushing the pocket where the recording pen was running. David slid the contract toward me. "Sign here, Mom. Once it's done, I'll transfer your share to your account." I looked at the paper, dense text, with the forged Lorraine at the bottom. "You sure?" I asked softly. David smiled. "Don't worry, Mom. It's all legal." I set the pen on the table, looked at my son, and said slowly, "Some signatures bring money, others end a family." At that moment, Karen signaled. The door opened, and Thomas walked in with 2 police officers. David froze. "What's this?" he asked. Karen pulled out the real documents, her voice cold. "David Andrews, the notary, confirmed the authorization you submitted is forged. Here's a recording of you and Mr. Johnson discussing splitting the money after Mom signs. It's all recorded." Thomas placed a tablet on the table and played the recording. David's voice rang clear. "She'll sign. She won't dare fight back. Once it's done, you'll get your cut." Rachel sat stunned. Mark backed toward the door. David's face paled, his voice breaking. "Mom, what are you doing? You'd ruin me?" I stood, looking into his eyes. "No, David, you ruined yourself. I'm just showing you the consequences." The police stepped forward, reading the detention order. David struggled, shouting, "You don't understand. I did it for the company, for the family." I replied softly, tears rolling down. "A family doesn't need a thief, David. A family needs honesty." As they led him away, I turned aside, afraid I'd collapse. Thomas placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice low. "It's over, Lorraine. You won." I shook my head. "No, Mr. Reed. I got the house back. My son, I've lost him." That evening, Portland was rainy. I sat by the window, listening to the rain hit the glass, and opened my notebook to write. Today, I taught my son his final lesson, one he once knew but forgot. Greed always has a price, and sometimes, the teacher is the one betrayed. After the police took David, I sat in the empty room, my hands still trembling slightly. Karen gathered the papers. Thomas turned off the recorder, both looking at me with a mix of pity and respect. "You did great," Karen said. "I've never seen anyone so calm." I gave a faint smile, my voice hoarse with exhaustion. When your heart's been broken long enough, you stop shaking. All that's left is silence. Karen urged me to rest, and Thomas promised to follow the case through. On the way home, the rain poured harder. I drove slowly through the lit streets, wondering if I'd just lost my son or only now begun to find the truth. 2 days later, the police released David. They didn't have enough evidence to hold him, only keeping the documents for investigation. I learned this through a call from Thomas. "They let him go, but don't worry," he said. "We're gathering more evidence. He can't escape." I stayed silent. In my mind, I saw David's face as he was handcuffed, no longer arrogant, just a scared child caught doing wrong. I'd taught countless students who made mistakes, but never thought I'd have to teach my own son this way. That evening, as I sorted through the remaining documents, there was a knock at the door. I opened it. David stood there, his shirt-soaked face weary. "I want to talk," he said. I stepped back, not inviting him in. "The police let you go," I said softly. "Yeah," he replied. "They have nothing on me. I came to ask you to stop. I was wrong, but it hasn't gone that far. You're killing me, Mom." I looked at my son, seeing the arrogance still in his eyes, the way he believed a soft word would sway me. I asked, "Are you afraid of losing your reputation or your money?" He didn't answer, only said quietly, "You don't understand. I just wanted to save the company. I did it for the family," I replied, my voice calm. "When you took my house, you weren't thinking of family." Then I closed the door. Outside, the rain fell harder, drowning out his call of Mom. The next morning, Thomas came with a new folder. I found this. David wasn't just planning to sell the house. He used your property to secure a bank loan for his personal debts. If we submit this evidence, the case turns criminal. I stared at the numbers, the bank statements, and asked softly, "What about Rachel?" Thomas said, his voice low. "She knew. Her name's in some transactions. But I think David's the mastermind." I nodded. "Good. Let justice speak." That afternoon, Karen called. "The police want you at Mark Johnson's brokerage office tomorrow morning. They'll recreate the scene and verify statements." I paused. "So I'll see him again?" "Yes, but don't worry. Thomas and I will be there. This is your chance to end it." I hung up, sitting in silence. This time, I wasn't afraid. I only felt a heavy sadness, deep enough to make my heart ache. I knew this meeting would be the last time I could look at my son as part of my family. The next morning, the sky was heavy with clouds. I wore my old wool coat, carrying the folder. At the office, Mark was there, leaning against a table, eyes nervous. Karen was talking to the police. David came in last. He was thinner, with stubble, his shirt half-buttoned. Seeing me, he stopped. "Mom," he said softly, his voice lacking confidence. I looked at my son, seeing exhaustion in his eyes, but also something else, a hint of shame. The police asked everyone to sit. Thomas played the recording, outlining the case. When he mentioned the old recording, David bowed his head, hands clasped. Karen said, "If you have anything to say to lighten your case, now's the time." David looked up at me, speaking slowly. "I know I was wrong. I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom. I thought I could use the house to save the company, then buy it back. But things spiraled, and I lost control. Mom, I didn't mean." I cut him off. "Not mean to. You forged documents, deceived the notary, took my belongings, and you say you didn't mean to?" Tears welled up, not from anger, but from pity for myself. "You took your father's house, David, the place he built with his hands, board by board. You turned it into a deal. You killed your own memories." The room was silent. Rachel sobbed, covering her face. Mark sighed, looking down. David said nothing, his lips trembling. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry." For the first time, his apology didn't soften me. I only said, "Sorry doesn't restore trust, but at least you finally spoke." The police took statements, asking David to sign a confirmation. As the pen touched the paper, I heard a snap inside, like a fragile thread breaking. Karen picked up the documents and turned to me. "It'll be handled. After today, you can rest easy." I nodded slightly. As everyone left, I stayed in the room alone. Afternoon light slanted through the window, dust floating like mist. I sat in the old chair, staring at the empty table, thinking of the journey behind me. That evening, back home, I opened my diary. On a new page, I wrote, "Justice doesn't come with applause, but in silence." Today, I lost the son I once had, but perhaps I found myself again, the woman who dared to stand for what's right, even against her own flesh and blood. I closed the notebook and looked around the apartment, now returned to me, each old item back in place. Michael's photo still hung in the corner, his eyes watching me gently. I whispered, "See, honey." I kept our home. Outside the window, Portland drizzled. In the sound of the rain, I heard my heart beat calmly again, for the first time after months of storms. The next morning, I woke in the quiet apartment. Early sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating specks of dust like the breath of the past returning. I sat up, looking around the familiar yet strange room. After all the upheaval, I was back in this house, but it wasn't the same. It was no longer a home, but proof of a battle, where I had to choose between a mother's love and what was right. While cleaning out the desk drawer, I found an old envelope tucked deep beneath a stack of files. The handwriting on it was familiar. "For Lorraine, open when our son is grown." My heart stopped. It was Michael's handwriting. I vaguely recalled that after his death, I had stored away some of his documents without ever opening them. With trembling hands, I tore open the envelope. Inside was a letter and an old investment certificate. The letter read, "Lorraine, if you're reading this, it means our son has grown up and you're still in this house. I'm not writing this to talk about money, but to remind you that every generation must learn the lesson of trust." I once made the mistake of blindly trusting others and lost what I cherished. I hope, if our son ever loses his way, you'll use wisdom, not tears, to teach him. And if you need it, all the documents for the investment I left are in a sealed account under your name. Don't tell anyone, not even our son." I sat frozen. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. Michael had known. Perhaps he foresaw that one day, greed could tear apart even the closest bonds. I held the investment certificate, staring at the number printed on it. A significant sum. Tears streamed down my face, not from joy, but from pain. Why was the man who was gone wiser than all the living? That evening, I called Karen and Thomas, inviting them over. After I read the letter aloud, Karen was silent for a long moment before saying, "It seems your husband prepared for everything. This could be the key to reclaiming ownership and securing legal protection." Thomas looked at me and asked, "Are you going to use it?" I replied, "I don't want to spend a cent on myself, but I might use it to end this cycle of mistakes in our family." The next day, I went to the bank to verify the account. The clerk opened the file and confirmed it was still fully intact. As I signed the withdrawal form, I saw the words Lorraine Andrews, legal owner, a phrase my son had tried to erase with forgery just weeks ago. Now, it stood clear, like a confirmation that justice, though late, always arrives. That afternoon, Rachel came to see me. She stood outside the door for a long time, holding a black umbrella, her face gaunt. "Mom," she said, her voice hoarse, "I know I have no right to be here, but I need to say something." I didn't respond, just opened the door. She stepped in, standing silently before the wedding photo on the wall. I'm pregnant," she said, tears falling. "It's David's. I don't know what to do. He hasn't spoken to me since his arrest." I froze. Everything seemed to collapse another layer. I told her to sit. "Rachel, are you going to keep this baby?" "I don't know. I'm scared. I don't want it to grow up in a family like this." I looked at her, remembering myself over 30 years ago, pregnant with David, and just as frightened. I said softly, "The child isn't to blame. It won't be a copy of its parents unless you teach it to be." Rachel sobbed, burying her head in her hands. "Mom, I'm sorry. I knew everything, but I didn't dare stop David. I was afraid of losing him." I sighed, my voice slow. "Love can't save anyone if it makes you forget what's right. But if you truly want to make amends, let me help." I took out Michael's letter and showed it to her. He said every generation must learn about trust. David failed, but maybe this child is a chance for the next generation to start anew. Rachel looked at me, choking up. "Can you still forgive?" I replied softly. "Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, but anger won't bring back beautiful memories." After Rachel left, I sat by the window for a long time. The afternoon rain fell steadily, the city lights shimmering on the wet pavement. Michael's voice echoed in me, warm and distant. "See, Lorraine, everything comes back to where it began, not to punish, but to heal." That night, I opened my diary. Today I uncovered a secret from the previous generation, not about money, but about preparation. Michael taught me how to stand even when love is betrayed. Now it's my turn to pass that lesson to the next generation. I closed the notebook and looked at the wedding photo. The light reflected off the glass, glinting like a response from the man who was gone. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. I whispered, "Thank you, Michael. The secret you left wasn't just wealth, but the belief that integrity can still be passed down." 2 months later, the case of Andrews was officially brought to trial at Multnomah County Court. That morning, Portland was shrouded in thick fog, the sun barely peeking through like a vague warning. I wore a dark dress, a gray scarf, and walked slowly down the long stone-tiled hallway. Each click of my shoes reminded me of my teaching days, when justice existed only in the pages of literature. But today, it was real, and it was judging my own family. The courtroom was packed. Local media came to cover the story, as a son being sued for stealing his mother's property was no common tale. At the defendant's bench, David sat beside his lawyer, his face gaunt, eyes vacant. I looked at my son, my heart aching. No mother could be indifferent seeing the child she once cradled standing in the dock. In the row behind, Rachel sat with her head bowed, hands resting on her belly, where the unborn child still grew. My lawyer, Karen, began with a calm voice. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Lorraine Andrews, is a victim of forged documents, property theft, and deliberate deception by her own son. This act not only violates the law, but destroys the moral foundation of family. She presented the forged authorization, the recording, bank records, and notary statements. Everything was laid out clearly, without emotion or embellishment. David's lawyer countered, his voice gentle, trying to soften the issue. The defendant acted in panic as his company faced bankruptcy. He believed he could temporarily use his mother's property to save the situation and repay later. It was a mistake, not a deliberate crime. I looked at David. He didn't meet my eyes. His hands were clenched, trembling. When it was time for witnesses, Thomas took the stand. He detailed the investigation, every meeting, every recording. His voice was low, steady, leaving no gaps. When he read David's words, she'll sign, she won't dare fight back. The courtroom fell silent. I saw David bow his head, his lips bitten until they bled. Then I was called to testify. I stood in the center of the court, looking around the stern judge, the lawyers, reporters, and the son I once believed would carry on his father's kindness. I spoke slowly, each word deliberate. I'm not suing to imprison my son. I want this court to see that justice cannot stop because of blood ties. I taught thousands of students that truth always has a price. Today, I only want to prove that this mother, though in pain, must pay that price to keep her dignity. No one spoke. Only the faint tapping of the court clerk's pen broke the silence. I looked down at David. He was crying, not loudly, just silently, as if tears were the last defense he had. After 2 days of arguments, the judge returned with the verdict. The room held its breath. Based on irrefutable evidence, the court finds the defendant, David Andrews, guilty of forging legal documents and property theft. Sentence, 3 years in prison, with full compensation for damages to Mrs. Lorraine Andrews. However, considering the defendant's cooperation and remorse, the court allows for a reduced term with good behavior. I heard every word, but it felt like a dream. Karen squeezed my shoulder lightly. Thomas nodded slightly. I felt no joy, no satisfaction, only an emptiness spread through me, as if the sentence wasn't for my son, but for me, the mother who failed. As the police approached, David stood, looking at me. Mom, he called softly. I turned back. Don't hate me, Mom. I know I deserve this, but I'm sorry. I looked at my son, holding back tears. I don't hate you, David, but I hope you learn what I tried to teach you all my life. No one has the right to take what isn't theirs, not even love. He nodded and followed the police out. The courtroom door closed with a sound like a final full stop. That afternoon, Portland was still rainy. I left the court, walking a long way without knowing where I was going. Passing a park, children's laughter warmed and pained me at once. I sat on a stone bench, opened my small notebook, and wrote, "Justice doesn't bring joy. It only restores balance. But sometimes, balance is the only thing we need to stand firm." A few days later, I received a letter from the prison. David's handwriting was shaky but sincere. Mom, I don't expect forgiveness, but if I ever get out, I want to start over. I know Dad would be ashamed of me, but I promise, I'll be different. I folded the letter and placed it in my diary next to Michael's old letter. 2 men, 2 generations, 2 lessons. One about trust, one about redemption. That evening, I lit a candle by the window. Its flickering light reflected on the wall, warmer than ever. I spoke softly, as if to the air. Justice has been served. Now there's only hope that one day my son will understand. Forgiveness isn't about erasing sins, but believing people can find their way back. After the trial, everything seemed to slow. I no longer rushed around, no longer got calls from lawyers or police. The house was so quiet that each tick of the clock startled me. At first, I felt empty, as if my whole life was reduced to silence. But then, in that quiet, something began to change. One morning, I got a call from the prison. The officer's voice was low but polite. "Mrs. Lorraine, inmate David Andrews wants to join a rehabilitation program and requests regular contact with you through letters. Do you agree?" I was silent for a few seconds, then said, Yes, but I don't promise to reply. He chuckled softly. As long as you read them, that might be enough. A few weeks later, the first letter arrived. David's handwriting was still messy, but different, slower, less rushed. Mom, today I started working in the prison's woodshop. I miss Dad, the house, and the smell of sawdust. He taught me to cut. I realize I've cut away so much in life, not just wood, but the ties to you. I'm sorry. I read it, folded it, and put it away. I didn't cry, but something warmed in my chest. Perhaps redemption sometimes starts with small things like that. From then on, I received a letter every month. David wrote about reading books, teaching younger inmates to write. Once he mentioned rebuilding a broken wooden chair in the shop. I want to send it to you when I'm released, as a way to say I'm learning to rebuild what I broke. I read that sentence over and over that evening. Each word was like a small chisel tapping at my heart, creating the quiet sound of remorse. Meanwhile, Rachel gave birth, a healthy boy. She came to me, holding the baby, her eyes red. Mom, I named him Michael, she said softly, to remind him of his grandfather, the only man in this family who never betrayed anyone. I looked at the baby, his round eyes and tiny smiling mouth, unaware of adult sins. I gently touched his small hand and said, "Grow up different from your father, okay?" I started visiting Rachel weekly. Her rented apartment was small but bright. I taught her to cook, plant flowers on the balcony. Sometimes, we read David's letters together. She often stayed silent, and I just smiled. Neither of us mentioned the past, because we both knew silence was sometimes the only way to heal. One March afternoon, I received a package from the prison. Inside was the wooden chair David had mentioned. Carved on its surface was "For the woman who taught me to stand." I sat in the chair, my trembling hands tracing its rough cuts, my eyes blurring. For the first time in months, I let myself cry fully, not from hurt, but from a fragile hope. That evening, I sat by the window and wrote in my diary, "Justice punishes, but time heals." I may never forget what my son did, but I can't deny that in the darkness, he's found a bit of light. I once thought a mother's love was dead, but maybe it was just sleeping. Outside, Portland lit up. Children's laughter rang from the apartment next door. Cars rolled steadily on the wet street. I sipped tea, looking at Michael's photo on the wall. "See," I said softly, "the boy's starting to change." In my imagination, I heard his kind laugh. "I knew it, Lorraine. You always make things better, even in ruins." I closed the notebook and blew out the candle. The room darkened, but my heart glowed with a gentle light, the light of a mother who'd faced loss and was learning to forgive, slowly but truly. That summer came late, and Portland draped itself in soft golden sunlight like an old memory. I began waking early each day, brewing coffee, opening the window to let the sun pour in. The house was different now, less cold, filled with more laughter, and the smell of Rachel's freshly baked cookies. When she brought Michael over to play, the baby grew fast, only a few months old, but already giggling whenever I waved and sang old nursery rhymes. Sometimes, watching him play, my heart softened. Maybe happiness doesn't come from being forgiven, but from learning to love again after everything. One morning, while watering the daisies on the porch, the neighbor's girl, Leela, ran up, holding a tattered notebook. "Miss Lorraine," she said, "can you help me with my English homework? Mom's working the night shift, and I don't understand some sentences in this story." I smiled, took the notebook, and showed her how to read. 10 minutes turned into half an hour, then an hour. When Lila left, she turned back and asked, "Can I come again tomorrow?" I nodded. And so, the first class began. Just me, a wooden table, and a child who needed someone to listen. Word spread faster than I expected. The next week, 2 more kids came, then 5, then 7, all children of night shift workers or single parents, kids who needed to learn but couldn't afford tutoring centers. I set out plastic chairs on the porch, dusted off Michael's old childhood blackboard. I didn't call it a class, just told people, "I'm only reading with the kids." But gradually, it became a routine, a joy. Every afternoon, the children's clear laughter filled the street. I taught them to write a kind sentence, to tell stories with their hearts, and to say sorry without shame. One day, Lila asked, "Miss, why do you teach us for free?" I replied softly, "Because someone once taught me for free, With love. She paused, then hugged me tightly. In that moment, I knew I'd found what I'd been missing, a reason to keep living. Afternoons, Rachel often brought Michael over. I'd hold him, singing while watching my students write. Once, Rachel said, "Mom, I think Michael will love words like you." I smiled. "As long as he doesn't forget what's right." Rachel nodded, her gaze distant. I knew she still carried guilt, but she was trying, day by day, like me, and like David in prison. A few weeks later, I received another letter from David. "Mom, I heard from the warden that you're teaching a literacy class. I'm so happy. In here, I'm also teaching some friends to write. I think I finally understand why you loved that profession so much. You once said words can save people from silence. Now I truly get it." I read the letter, tears streaming down. Outside, the children's voices rang out. "Miss Lorraine." I finished writing. I wiped my eyes, smiled, and stepped onto the porch. I sat among the small circle, holding each sheet of paper, reading slowly. The crooked handwriting was full of effort. "I want to study to help my mom. I want to grow up to be a teacher. I want to write a letter to my dad far away." Each sentence was like a seed. I knew I couldn't change the past, but I could plant hope for these children, those who still believed in kindness. That evening, after class ended, I cleared the chairs and sat on the wooden chair David made. A breeze drifted through the porch, carrying the scent of jasmine. Rachel and Michael had gone home. The street was quiet, only the distant sound of cars. I opened my diary and wrote, "I once lost everything, my home, my son, my trust. But today, I have back what matters most. The feeling that I'm still useful to the world. Kindness doesn't vanish when betrayed. It just waits for someone brave enough to call its name again." Late that night, I looked at Michael's photo on the wall. The lamplight reflected in his eyes, like he was smiling. "See?" I said softly. "Our classroom is full of laughter again." In my imagination, I heard his warm, proud reply. "I knew it, Lorraine. You always find a way to turn pain into light." I closed the diary, blew out the candle, and stepped onto the porch. The moon hung above the house, glowing softly like a blank page. I stood quietly for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling a peace as if the storm had never come. Somewhere in the breeze, I thought I heard children's laughter echoing, laughter of the past, the present, and the future. I still believed could be brighter. One early autumn afternoon, as the leaves began to change on the little street, I got a call from Thomas. His voice was still low, but this time, with a hint of hesitation, "Mrs. Lorraine, I need to meet you." "It's about Michael." My heart stopped. Michael had been gone for over a decade. What more was there to say? I arranged to meet him at the old cafe where Michael and I used to sit every weekend when we were still teaching. When I arrived, Thomas was already there, a thick envelope in front of him. He got straight to the point. "I found this in the bank's archived records while reviewing old assets. It seems your husband deposited it there, but no one claimed it." I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, unmistakably Michael's script. I took a deep breath, opened it, my hands trembling slightly. "My dearest Lorraine, if you're reading this, I'm likely long gone. I know you'll always be strong, but there's something I never told you, and you need to know. David wasn't the first in our family to be led astray by greed. Years ago, I was too. In desperation after losing my job, I used my father's savings without permission. I thought I could earn it back, but I didn't in time. When he passed, I never got to say sorry. From then on, I swore I wouldn't let our son grow up without understanding the value of honesty. If one day David loses that, don't just see his sin, see me in him, because sometimes mistakes are a legacy we don't want to pass on, but they follow the bloodline anyway." I read to the end, tears falling onto the paper, blurring the last words. "Oh, Michael, so you carried that burden of regret too, and I, who loved you all my life, never knew." Thomas sat quietly, waiting for me to compose myself. "I think he wanted you to understand," he said, "that David isn't a monster, just a man repeating his father's mistake." I sat still, unable to respond. That evening, back home, I opened the letter again. The yellow lamplight fell on the faded handwriting, like Michael's voice echoing from the past. I read each line again, then looked at his photo on the wall. Did you hide this from me because you feared I'd be disappointed? I said softly. I'm not disappointed, just sad you carried that burden alone. I suddenly understood why Michael was so strict about teaching David self-respect. Perhaps he feared our son would repeat his path, and fate, cruel as it is, made it happen. That night, I wrote in my diary, it turns out the final truth doesn't make us hate more, but understand more. People, across generations, don't just inherit hair or eyes, but unabsolved mistakes too. The next morning, I went to the prison. David was nearing the end of his sentence. I didn't give notice. When I entered the visiting room, my son looked up, stunned. Mom? He asked, his voice trembling. I sat down and placed Michael's letter in front of him. Your father wrote this for me, but I think you should read it. David opened it, his hands shaking. His eyes moved over each line, stopping at Michael's confession of his own mistake. Tears fell onto the table. I didn't know, he said, choking up. I thought Dad was perfect. I thought I was just the one who shamed his name. I replied softly, no, son, you just continued an unfinished story. But now, you can be the one to write a different ending. David bowed his head, hands covering his face. I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know how to fix it. I took his hand, rough and cold. You don't need to fix it, I said. Just don't hide it. Tell the story, so others don't repeat it. He looked up, his eyes brighter despite the tears. You think I can do that? Yes, because you started by asking. A week later, I got a letter from the prison board. They said David had volunteered for a storytelling program for new inmates, sharing about mistakes and consequences. He says he wants to do what his father never got to, the officer wrote. I read the letter, feeling as if someone had placed a hand on my shoulder. Michael was at peace, and my son was finally finding his way back. That afternoon, I went to the porch where the kids were writing. I told them a story about a father and son who made the same mistake, but the third generation chose differently. They listened quietly. When I finished, Leela asked, Miss, is that story true? I smiled. Yes, because people don't just learn from books, but from their own mistakes. When the kids left, I watched the sunset. The last rays touched the porch, falling on Michael's photo. I said softly, see, I finally understand what you wanted to teach. Forgiveness isn't erasing the past, it's letting it rest. That night, I opened my diary and wrote the final line. The ultimate truth is we all can err, but only those brave enough to admit it are truly free. I've forgiven my husband, my son, and perhaps myself. I closed the notebook and blew out the candle. From the porch, children's laughter echoed faintly in the breeze. I sat still, listening to my heart beat, gentle and real, as if for the first time in years, I was truly alive again. The day David was released, Portland was in spring, a rare spring, with gentle sun and rain falling lightly like mist. I stood outside the prison gate, holding the gray wool scarf I'd knitted in the last months of the year. This time, I wasn't trembling like my first visit. Between us, all blame had settled, leaving only a silence to be filled with sincerity. The gate opened, and David stepped out with a few others, carrying a small canvas bag. He was thinner, his skin tanned, but his eyes shone brightly. Seeing me, he paused for a moment, then smiled. The smile I thought I'd never see again. I walked forward and said softly, "Let's go home, son." He replied quietly, his voice trembling. "Can I really come back?" I squeezed his shoulder and nodded. Home never closes its door to someone who knows how to return. On the drive back, we were silent. Sometimes, silence is the only language delicate enough to hold all that can't be said. As we crossed the bridge over the Willamette River, David looked out and said softly, "Mom, in there, I thought a lot about Dad, about you, and how I tore everything apart. I don't know why you kept visiting me," I answered, "because I wanted you to remember that even if you were wrong, you're still my son. I didn't come to forgive, but to remind you that you have a place to come back to." When the car stopped in front of the apartment, David stood still. The house, repainted pale yellow, had a porch full of flower pots, and children's laughter echoed. Rachel was holding Michael, now over a year old, with soft curls and rosy cheeks. Seeing David, she froze, tears streaming down. "You," she called, her voice breaking. David stepped forward, keeping a distance, as if afraid to shatter the moment. "I'm not sure I deserve to meet him," he said. Rachel replied, "No one deserves anything forever. Just know how to fix it." She set Michael on the grass, and the toddler took a few wobbly steps, looking up at his father. David knelt, arms open. The child touched his father's face, curious, then giggled. That laugh was like a cleansing rite for the three people standing at the old threshold. I watched silently, feeling something break in my chest, not from pain, but from relief. For years, I feared this happiness could never return. But some things, if you're patient enough to wait, find a way back. That evening, we ate dinner together. The first meal in 3 long years. Rachel made soup, David set the table, and I brewed tea. No one spoke much, just simple questions. "Want more, son? Are you cold, Mom?" Words that seemed ordinary, but to me, were a miracle. When Michael fell asleep, I stepped onto the porch, looking at the moon reflecting on the river. David came out, stood beside me, silent for a long time before saying, "Mom, I want to tell you something." I nodded. He spoke of his days in prison, where he reread the books I once taught, where he found himself in the stories of Victor Hugo or Steinbeck. "I read Les Miserables every night," he said, "and I realized redemption isn't escaping the past, but living to deserve the trust given back." I looked at my son, seeing in his eyes the calm of someone who'd hit rock bottom and learned to climb up. I pulled out an old envelope, Michael's letter. "Your father said mistakes can be a legacy, but people can rewrite them. You understand that now, don't you?" David nodded, eyes teary. "I do, Mom, and I want to teach that to my son." A few days later, David began helping with my porch classes. At first, the kids were scared, having heard adults whisper he was in prison. But David didn't react, just smiled kindly, patiently teaching them to spell. One day, Lena asked, "Mister, did you really do something wrong?" David replied, "Yes, but I'm learning to do right again." That answer silenced the porch. Then the kids burst into laughter. I sat in the corner, watching, my heart swelling with a strange pride, not from success, but from growth. That evening, while cleaning up, David looked at me. "I want to start a woodworking class for the young guys in the neighborhood, like what I learned in prison." I think, if someone had taught me sooner, I wouldn't have gone so far astray. I smiled, taking his hand. "If that's what you want, I'll help." Months later, the first woodworking class opened in the old shed behind the house. The sounds of sawing wood, hammering nails, and young men's laughter mixed with the children's reading. The house, once a place of brokenness, became a starting point for others. One afternoon, I saw Rachel at the door, her eyes watching David teach a boy to cut wood. Her gaze glowed, the look of someone who knew the past could hurt, but the future was still worth believing in. That night, I wrote, "Meeting again isn't returning to the old place, it's daring to look at each other with new eyes, not of the past, but of the present." My son is no longer the obedient boy of old, nor the one who betrayed me. He's just a man learning to love and make amends again. After writing, I looked out to the porch. The yellow lamplight fell on the wooden chair David sent. Michael slept in his father's arms, Rachel's head on his shoulder. The scene made my heart strangely peaceful. I said softly to myself, "So, forgiveness doesn't need to be spoken, it just needs to be lived, day by day." Outside, a gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine. On the wall, Michael's photo reflected soft light. I looked at him, smiling. "See, we've met again, not just between mother and son, but between all that was once broken." Thank you for joining me on Lorraine's journey, a mother who reclaimed justice, forgiveness, and love in her own home. If you believe everyone deserves a second chance, please subscribe to the channel to catch more touching stories.